Coming up on Primetime News, the revised parliamentary bill that led President Park Geun-hye to exercise her veto power for the first time gets scrapped as the National Assembly fails to put it up for a revote. Greek voters overwhelmingly and surprisingly reject bailout terms laid out by international creditors. Still, the country's finance minister, who took a strong stand in the no vote, resigns. And Japan wins UNESCO recognition for its wartime industrial facilities after admitting that some of the locations used Koreans as forced laborers. The sincerity of that admission is in question. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Monday, July 6th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
The controversial revision bill to the parliamentary law that was passed by more than 200 lawmakers from both ruling and opposition parties about a month ago was technically scrapped today.
That's right. It failed to pass through Parliament a second time as the ruling sincerity party chose not to show up to the vote. Our Park Ji-hye starts us off.
In the case of a revote on vetoed bills, the Constitution stipulates that more than half the Assembly's total members must be in attendance, with more than a two-thirds vote in favor required. But in Monday's vote, only 128 out of 298 lawmakers cast their ballots. The bill will now be automatically scrapped at the end of next May, when current lawmakers' terms end. This result was expected as the ruling sincerity party, which holds majority in parliament, said it would not take part in the voting session. Still, lawmakers from both parties made their final pitch before the vote.
Article 75 and 95 of our Constitution allows the executive branch to issue ordinances, but it does not allow the Assembly to revise executive ordinances. We have not even started a fact-finding investigation into last year's Seoul ferry disaster. The special law would help get to the bottom of the cause of the tragedy, but current government decrees have limited the investigation to merely government research.
The vetoed revision of the parliamentary law would have allowed the Assembly to make requests for changes to executive ordinances. But President Park cut down the bill late last month, saying it threatened the constitutional principle of division of powers. After the failed revote, the president's office said the Assembly's decision reconfirmed the nation's constitutional values. But the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy called it a failure of democracy and boycotted the rest of the plenary session. Ruling Sincerity Party continued on without them. Meanwhile, the embattled Sincerity floor leader Yoo Seung-min carried on with his duties despite mounting pressure from within his party to step down over the initial passage of the revision bill. Speculation is that he will wait until the July extraordinary session is over before turning in letter of resignation. Park Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Since vetoing a revision to the National Assembly law late last month, President Park's approval rating has jumped nearly 4 percentage points.
That's right. In a poll by Real Meter conducted last week, 37.3% of 2,500 respondents supported the president's running of state affairs, up 3.7 percentage points from a week earlier. The pollster said the latest findings reflect those who consider themselves politically leaning to the right.
President Park's approval rating had recently hit an all-time low of 29% amid public criticism over the government's poor handling of the country's MERS outbreak. Well, Greek voters, 60% of them, more than 60% in fact, have rejected demands by international creditors for more austerity in exchange for a bailout of its bankrupt economy.
It was a high-risk gamble that Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras took with the future of his country, but in the end it was a decisive win. For details, we turn to our Kwon-soa.
The margin of victory was far wider than expected. an indication that many indecisive voters may have been convinced by Greek Prime Minister Tsipras' claim that a no vote would help the country secure a better deal from its international creditors.
This is our first step to our next battle. Now it truly starts. I do not think that everything will suddenly be perfect, but it's a first step in making fear go away.
After the results were announced, the Greek government said it would try to restart talks with its European partners and reach a conclusion within 48 hours. One person that will not be included in these talks is Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis, who announced on his blog that he will be stepping down from his post at the request of Prime Minister Tsipras. He said it was because he is considered unwelcome at finance minister talks by some Eurozone members. Time has run out for Greece, which is dealing with an economy stuck in a protracted recession with high unemployment and banks dangerously low on capital. The international bailout, under which it received nearly 240 billion euros in rescue loans, expired last week, on the same day Athens defaulted on an IMF repayment. Greece's fate could be decided at an emergency Eurozone summit set to be held Tuesday. Many analysts say there is a high chance the country could be forced to leave the Eurozone and switch back to its old currency, the drachma. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And now to help us navigate through the possible domino effect the Greek vote may have on the global economy, we are joined by Professor Mason Ritchie from Hwang University of Foreign Studies. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Right, Professor, some experts warn if this self-inflicted financial tragedy continues, economic hardships and social tensions await. But the people of Greece seem quite resolute in their decision. How do you see this game of chicken, if you might call it, playing out?
Well, I wish I knew for sure. In all seriousness, we're in uncharted territory. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras called this referendum gambling, that a no vote would strengthen his position going into possible new negotiations with the so-called Troika. If the European Central Bank cuts off funding the emergency liquidity assistance to Greek banks, they'll be both insolvent and illiquid, at which point Greece will have to most likely introduce a parallel currency, a scrip, in order to pay its employees, in order to pay its contracts and those types of things. And that would be, practically speaking, the first step towards a Grexit.
And it's not so surprising now that the Eurozone is in the tailspin after the people of Greece gave a loud and clear no in response to the bailout terms. What are the possible political and economic consequences for Europe?
Well, they're huge. If Greece's creditors return to the negotiating table and offer a much better deal for Greece, you're going to find some of the other weak economies emboldened in the sense that playing chicken, as you put it, is the right strategy. Spain, Portugal, Ireland, some other countries have gone through some painful austerity measures, and they may be, for instance, emboldened in the future to elect more left-oriented governments, which the European establishment is not very enthusiastic about, obviously.
The Professor, European stocks and the euro have dropped over fears that Greece may exit from the euro currency bloc. Asian markets, including Korea's, have slid. What do you think the extent of the fallout will be, especially on Europe?
Well, Greece is, of course, in terrible shape, and so kind of whatever comes out of the situation, whether it be a deal with austerity or whether there's a Greek exit, exit the Eurozone, reintroduce the drachma, default on its debts. For Europe as a whole, I think increasingly you're finding both politicians and economists simply saying, let's chalk up the losses, let's learn our lessons, and let's at least get some certainty in the markets going forward.
And Korea was not an exception in the global market slide. The government actually discussed a possible contingency plan to prepare for the impacts of a potential Grexit. Although many expect any effects to be limited, some say Korea is not completely immune. What's your take?
My take is that that's largely correct, that the short-term measures to shore up the response to volatility in the forex markets and also in the equity markets in Korea is useful. There may be some investors who will want to pull money out of economies like Korea. Some people have talked about the global sell-off in markets over the last week or so, and in particular in China, as being connected to the Greece situation. And there may be a little bit of truth to that, but I don't think that the Greece situation will ultimately, in the long term, make much of a difference in the global economy, or in the Chinese economy, or in the Korean economy, and in fact in Asia more largely.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Professor Mason Ritchie. We do hope to speak to you again sometime soon for your insights in this matter and something else. We hope you have a pleasant trip to France, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Following months of negotiations, Korea and Japan have reached an agreement on Tokyo's bid to list some of its wartime industrial facilities as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. While Tokyo does have some obligations to meet, there's doubt over Japan's sincerity regarding the issue. Hwang Ji-hye explains why.
The World Heritage Committee listed Tokyo's wartime industrial facilities as UNESCO sites at its 39th session in Bonn, Germany on Sunday. The listing, which follows months of negotiations between Korea and Japan, comes with a set of preconditions.
Japan is prepared to take measures that allow an understanding that there were a large number of Koreans and others who were brought against their will and forced to work under harsh conditions in the 1940s at some of the sites.
Japan's 23 industrial sites include 7 coal mines and shipyards, where nearly 60,000 Koreans were forced into labor in the 1940s during its colonial rule of Korea. Tokyo had initially marked them as being operational from 1850 to 1910. Japan also vowed to ensure the victims are remembered by establishing information centers at each site. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se welcomed the outcome, as it marks the first time that Tokyo has publicly acknowledged such cases of forced labor.
We are pleased that Japan's wartime industrial facilities were listed as World Heritage Sites in the form that takes account of our legitimate concerns.
But tensions remain, with Japan giving an ambiguous translation of its statement for its domestic audience.
The expression forced to work does not mean forced labor.
An official at Seoul's foreign ministry dismissed concerns, saying the English version of the statement has been officially adopted by the World Heritage Committee. He added that Japan must also follow up by submitting a progress report by the end of 2017, which will be reviewed by the World Heritage Committee the following year. If Japan's progress is deemed unsatisfactory, the sites could be removed from the UNESCO list. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Former First Lady Lee Hee-ho, the widow of President Kim Dae-jung, will visit North Korea next month. Her visit is largely aimed at providing much-needed help to North Korean children, but some are hoping it will contribute to easing strained inter-Korean relations. Our Han Da-eun has this report.
South Korean delegates from a peace center established by late President Kim Dae-jung met with their North Korean counterparts on Monday to discuss the much-anticipated visit of former First Lady Lee Hee-ho's visit to the north. After the meeting held in north-south border town of Kaesong, South Korean Chief Delegate Kim Sung-jae said that Lee will fly to Pyongyang on August 5th for her 4-day trip, which will be mainly focused on providing aid to North Korean children. She's expected to visit children's hospitals and daycare centers in the reclusive state's capital. Whether she'll meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un remains unknown. But pundits say the chances of their encounter are high, as Kim views late President Kim Dae-jung, who played a leading role in realizing the first-ever inter-Korean summit in 2000, in a favorable light. Hopes are high that her visit could contribute to thawing the icy relations between Seoul and Pyongyang. The South Korean government has not relayed any kind of message to Lee, but stated that it fully supports her visit. Some also hope that Yi will secure the release of 4 South Koreans currently detained in the north. But experts argue that would be beyond expectations, as freeing detainees requires extensive diplomatic efforts. 한다은, Arirang News.
The hospital that confirmed Korea's first MERS patient has reopened to the public 38 days after going on lockdown as a precaution against the outbreak. Pyeongtaek St. Mary's Hospital resumed normal function as of Monday. Officials say they have taken measures to ensure the hospital is safe and ready to admit new patients. Health authorities cleared the hospital to resume operations last month, but the hospital's management voluntarily delayed the reopening until today. The hospital has disinfected the building and installed outdoor clinics to stop patients with infectious diseases from entering. It has also upgraded its wards by converting rooms that used to hold up to 7 people into rooms with a maximum capacity of 4. Around 270 of the hospital's medical staff had been placed under home isolation since the outbreak, but were all released by June 13th. Korea had a total of 8 items that topped the global market share of products or services last year. That's up from 6 a year earlier. This, according to the Japanese business newspaper Nihon Keizai Shimbun, which conducted a survey on the superiority of 50 products and services. Korea's standing grew thanks to categories like shipbuilding, smartphones, liquid crystal panels, and lithium-ion batteries. Korea beat China, which only had 6 items leading global market share. The U.S. topped the list with 16, followed by Europe at 10 and Japan at 9. South Korea and the U.S. are conducting sea-to-shore logistics drills in the West Sea in an effort to improve work and cooperation between their joint forces. This year, they say their biggest obstacle was also their biggest accomplishment, which was adjusting to changing tides in treacherous waters. For more on this report, we turn to our Connie Kim.
After UN Supreme Commander for Allied Powers General Douglas MacArthur made an Incheon landing during the Korean War to repel North Korean forces pushing south down to the Korean peninsula, the U.S. supported its soldiers by transporting equipment, food, and vehicles through logistics over-the-shore operations, discharging cargo from ships anchored offshore. With the two Koreas still technically at war, South Korea and the U.S. are conducting a combined joint logistics over-the-shore exercise at Anmyeon Beach on the country's west coast. About 1,700 Army personnel from both sides have installed temporary port facilities and unloaded cargo there to improve sea-to-coast logistics support capabilities and communication in case of emergency situations. It's the second time for the two countries to conduct a combined JLOTS exercise in the region.
The difference between this exercise and the last one that was held is the sheer size of the operation.
The trickiest part of this year's exercise was adjusting to the big fluctuation in the tidal currents and shallow rise of the beach. The vehicles behind me are coming onto land from the U.S. Army's longest temporary floating pier. Laid out flat, it stretches out as long as 540 meters long. It marked the first successful connection of a floating pier on Korea's west coast, the result of extensive planning between the two sides.
Working in this environment with the tidal surge over the mud flats was extremely challenging, but I'm happy to report we succeeded. We did it.
In the face of continuing provocations from North Korea and regional security a major issue, the South Korea-U.S. Combined Forces Command plans to further develop operational capabilities in the Korean theater of operation by increasing testing and proficiency of JLOTS operations. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Anmyeon.
And for top international headlines, we now connect to a new face in Arirang, Lee Sun-ho at the News Center.
Our focus today, John Kerry urges Iran to make concessions in ongoing nuke talks. Pope Francis tours South America, and fans celebrate the U.S. Women's World Cup victory.
Congratulations to Team USA for beating Japan. But let's start off with the latest developments in the Iran nuclear talks. Kerry is urging Tehran to come to a conclusion on the deal as time is running out, right?
That's right, Daniel. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said in Vienna on Sunday that an Iranian nuclear agreement could be made this week if Iran makes some, quote, hard choices. If not, the United States could walk away. Speaking in between a series of meetings with the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, Kerry said that they had made, quote, genuine progress, but that several important issues have yet to be resolved.
At this point, this negotiation could go either way. If hard choices get made in the next couple of days and made quickly, we could get an agreement this week. But if they are not made, we will not.
Foreign ministers from other major powers also joined in on negotiations in order to help meet the deadline set for Tuesday. If a final agreement is reached, it would mean that Iran will limit its nuclear efforts for a decade or even longer, ending over 12 years of dispute. In return, countries would drop sanctions that have weakened Iran's oil-driven economy. And Pope Francis pays a memorable visit to South America, giving thanks for being able to return to the continent upon his arrival in Ecuador. His visit will encompass 3 of the area's poorest countries and stated that the Catholic Church would always help the most needy.
Giving special attention to our more fragile brothers and vulnerable minorities, Mr. President, you may always count on the Church to serve the Ecuadorian people.
However, not everything was rosy. Thousands of protesters took to the streets to demonstrate over tax changes and accusations of state authoritarianism. Protest leaders have since called a moratorium out of respect for Francis, who has emphasized the need for people to respect each other's differences. And turning to sports, the U.S. women's soccer team rejoices following a huge victory over Japan in the FIFA World Cup final held Sunday in Vancouver. The U.S. scored a whopping 5 goals, while Japan just made 2, leaving American fans ecstatic and proud.
A little, I think after the first 20 minutes, we kind of slowed down. I mean, we did score 4 goals, so yeah. But no, I never had a doubt in my mind. From the moment the game started, I knew we were going to win. Yeah.
On the other side of the world, Japanese fans were left in shock, some even in tears. But many conceded that the Americans put on a good game.
I'm sad, but that one goal was fantastic. They didn't lose without scoring, and I think that showed Japan's resilience, which was great.
This marks the first World Cup victory for the U.S. women's team since 1999 and their 3rd title overall. And this has been your International News Update. I'm Lee Seon-ho.
Three typhoons are traveling northward, but fortunately, the Korean peninsula will not be directly affected by any of these systems. But rain is in store as the ninth typhoon of the season, Chan-ho, pushes up the monsoon front. So it will rain from Jeju tonight before showers gradually spreads nationwide, and the capital will start to receive rain from Wednesday afternoon. So make sure to have an umbrella handy through the week. And while the central regions are hoping to get a nice amount of rain, Jeju and southern provinces will again get the most rainfall. In fact, some of the southern coastal regions could get more than 100 millimeters of heavy downpours till Wednesday. On that note, let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. Seoul rises to 29, while southern cities like Daegu and Gwangju will be much cooler, peaking at 22 and 23, and Busan will top out at 21 tomorrow afternoon. And as for the other parts, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 25 and 21, while Dokdo rises to 22. Now, for those of you in the southern regions, be sure to have that umbrella and layer up for tomorrow. That's all for the weather. Good night.
unless you're watching some sci-fi horror film about robots taking over the world, that should be a very interesting sight.
I know, exactly.
Well, that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for staying with us. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Please join us at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.